Welcome to Inside Startup Investing, the only podcast where you can invest in every guest. On this episode, I will be speaking with the co-founder and CEO of Sen-Jam Pharmaceutical, Jim Iversen. As a reminder, if you like what you hear on today's episode, you can invest in Sen-Jam on WeFunder, regardless of whether or not you are accredited with a minimum investment of $250 until March 31st, 2026. Inflammation. You've probably been told by your doctor or heard it on a podcast that inflammation in your body is one of the leading causes of so many of the worst ailments we as humans face, be it the onset of cancer, Alzheimer's, arthritis, and more. That's what makes Sen-Jam Pharmaceutical such an interesting biotech firm. I met Jim over 5 years ago now, and he has been a pioneer issuer in the Reg CF markets for many years now, as a serial issuer that has mastered raising capital online and doing a tremendous job of investor relations along the way. But that is beside the point. He and his team have built a platform of novel drugs focused on reducing inflammation in the body caused by everything from alcohol consumption to COVID and arthritis. Most importantly, they are advancing forward their pipeline with multiple drugs now wrapping up phase 2 trials and learning from these drugs, helping to progress forward other assets in their portfolio for preclinical and phase 1 trial work. In investing in Sen-Jam Pharmaceuticals, you are investing in a portfolio of inflammation-reducing focused biotech assets, each with its own tremendous potential, both from a human impact and a monetary impact as well. I've been impressed by their ability to build an active pipeline of drug candidates that are edging closer to licensing and commercialization. This is an interesting entry point for investors. As Jim puts it, they have significantly reduced the risk through IP protection and, of course, real results in their phase 2 trials. This is one I will continue to watch as they advance their pipeline of assets forward in the FDA approval process. But one thing you cannot deny is how big the opportunity is to be a leading player in inflammation management across multiple disease areas. As a focal point of underlying well-being, Jim and his team are sitting on a tremendous opportunity. So with that, let's get on to the show and welcome Jim. So listen, since our first conversation, you've certainly come a very long way. But let's back up for those who haven't had those conversations with you along the way. In a few succinct words, what is Sen-Jam and where do things stand today?
Yeah, Sen-Jam is a platform. It's a drug development company focused on AI, and we have developed a platform of therapeutics in the space of non-steroidal anti-inflammatories and mast cell stabilizers. And we've combined therapeutics that have never been combined before for large unmet needs. And in 2025, we completed 2 phase 2 clinical trials, which is incredible. And now we've used that data from that to interrogate, or we put it into our AI model, our innate inflammation engine known as Atlas. And it's been able to interrogate that data and actually validate our original hypothesis for the company, which was we believe that we can develop a platform of therapeutics, and as one indication advances, it's going to raise the whole platform. And what's come out of our recent discovery with these 2 clinical trials and interrogating the data through our AI system, we validated that model, which is really, really exciting.
Phase 2, for those who aren't in biotech, explain kind of the phase 1, 2, 3, and even preclinical, what that looks like and what phase 2 means.
Yeah, and let me take a step back on that. When we originally designed our business model, it was to de-risk on the clinical and regulatory side. So you're walking me right into that. And then file intellectual property. And as we got to the end of phase 2, which is a critical part of drug development, that we would be able to license our technology. And so on the regulatory side, we typically start out with a proof of concept, an idea, and then we'll do in vitro, in cell lines, in vivo, in animals, and then we'll ultimately look to move into humans. And to get into humans, so when we look at we initiate pre-IND meeting, which is a investigational new drug application. And then the FDA kind of allows us, and we set the guidelines of what we're looking to do for a phase 1, phase 2 clinical trial. The phase 1 is about safety and making sure that the drugs that we're putting together are not unsafe, and they're not unsafe being together. And then phase 2 is to show first signs of efficacy, and to help move from looking at exploratory data to confirmatory data. So after you complete a phase 2, you've got your foundation of exploratory data, you've got signals, you've got trends, you've got direction, and then it sets up to go back to the FDA for the end of phase 2 meeting. And in that meeting, that's where you're going to detail out phase 3, which is where it's a larger sampling of a data set, typically partially in clinic and partially at a clinic. And that's where you're looking to take the data that you originally were doing exploratory work around and then do confirmatory work. When you do your end of phase 2 clinical trial meeting with the FDA, you're setting all of that up all the way through NDA, which is new drug application.
In terms of your first drug that's kind of going through the clinical trial process that's completed phase 2, as you mentioned, can you talk a little bit about what things look like in terms of results and thoughts on timing and planning for phase 3?
Yeah, so the first therapeutic that we finished mid-year last year was for upper respiratory infection and COVID. And when we started, we combined some therapeutics, and we first looked at cell lines and saw how our drugs went against SARS-CoV-2, and we were very pleased with the results that we got back. We reduced the viral load of SARS-CoV-2 by greater than 90%, and that was enough to get us to move forward. We got accepted into Duke COVID task force, Duke University, and they were the principal investigators on that trial. And upon completing it, we had 150 patients, and we showed really solid signs for safety, which was really, really important, because one of the biggest challenges that you have with NSAIDs oftentimes is the GI effect. And one of the beliefs that we have is our mast cell stabilizer neutralizes the GI effect of the NSAID. And we proved that. And then with some sub-analysis work, we've shown efficacy around that as well. So from here, we're still reviewing the data, and then we'll be advancing to an end of phase 2 meeting with the FDA. The second therapeutic, which we just finished the clinical trial on, is for looking at alcohol's impact on inflammation. So basically, our whole Sen-Jam's whole platform is around reducing inflammation, increasing health span, and health and wellness. And so alcohol has a huge impact on inflammation, and we were able to do a 48-person clinical trial, completed that at the end of last year, just got the data set back, and the results have been very similar to that of the first clinical trial. But the most exciting thing is that we've been building an AI model around all of this, and now that we've been able to now we had the model, but we didn't have our data, and now we've been able to put our data into the model, which is over 1 million data points, and we're able to interrogate the data significantly, and then put our other platform assets in, which has been really, really exciting for us. That not only have we identified some other opportunities for intellectual property, but in 3 other assets that we have granted patents for, we've been able to put those and test them, and to see valuation inflection points based on what we've proven and how we could accelerate those drugs to market much faster.
Can you help explain kind of what that looks like? Like, what data did you ingest from this clinical trial? And then with the application of kind of AI to sift through it, what insights are you able to glean about your other potential drugs?
Yeah, so since our platform is made up of NSAIDs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, and we look at the whole category of NSAIDs, and either mast cell stabilizers or antihistamines. We're looking at combining these drugs that have never been combined before. Some of our drugs cross the blood-brain barrier, so we're looking at neuroinflammation for opioid withdrawal and methamphetamine use. And then we're looking at more classical examples and therapeutic indications or large unmet needs. And giving you an example of the 3 assets that we have patents granted for that we've been able to interrogate is we have a patent for upper respiratory infection, also over the counter, also known as the common cold. We received that patent in January of 2024, right around the time when the FDA came out and talked about phenylephrine and the fact that phenylephrine doesn't work, but it's a decongestant in every single cold product. And so our therapeutic doesn't need a decongestant. If you take it at first signs of getting a cold or getting an onset or going into a compromised area, it will reduce the inflammatory preventatively. So you're not going to get the buildup of everything that you need that often results in needing a decongestant. So that was one of the therapeutics that we've been able to use the platform of the results of these 2 clinical trials that really has now validated what we need to do and next steps with that. The second is we have a patent for inhibiting the adverse effects of vaccinations. And the core of the work that we're doing is around the innate immune system in your body and the adaptive immune system. The innate immune system is kind of the Marines. It's kind of, they're the fast to get to the job, and they assess things, and they're communicating to the adaptive immune system, which is slower, but more powerful. And so, we filed this patent a few years ago and we got the patent, but we've just been holding on to the patent. Now, given the results that we've gotten, which shows proof around the impact that we're having on the innate and adaptive immune system, that drug, there's been a stepwise valuation in that drug as well. And then the third is we have a therapeutic for enteropathic arthritis and the GI impact around that. And AI has now come back and said, this could be your crown jewel. Like, not only are you showing there's not a GI impact, which in that market, which is like a $50 billion market, is the biggest challenge in that market, you're satisfying that. And based on all of this other discovery stuff, we're set up to move into a pre-IND meeting to open up an IND for a phase 2 clinical trial.
When you think about kind of resource allocation, you have these later stage ones that should be closer to commercialization. And then you obviously have the longer term stuff that may be bigger opportunities, but is going to require many more years to get to market. How do you think about resource allocation across those drugs? And what is your focus in terms of, commercialization and getting yourself to market sooner rather than later to start monetizing these drugs?
Yeah, so resource allocation, we're always looking at best price value relationships. So, right now we're sitting on 2 sets of blood samples that, might cost $300,000 or $400,000 to complete those blood samples, but getting those results back and then bringing that back into our data set and to interrogate that with the AI model, that's just going to further really, really validate everything we're doing and the model. So it's a little bit of money, but the impact is going to be significant. From a commercialization perspective, originally our business model was to de-risk on the clinical and regulatory side and then file intellectual property, and then at the end of phase 2, license that technology. So that is still our model, but we're moving towards, we've gotten interest by third parties that want to fund our phase 3 clinical trials. They want to fund them for equity at significantly higher value than where our equity is now. And that just is a validation and a proof of concept of where we're doing. But what's really important to us is to get to market as quickly as possible and finding the right partners of doing that. So being prepared to license at the end of phase 2, we're set up to do that, or bringing our assets all the way to phase 3 is also an alternative.
People talk about it all the time, but commercialization of these drugs is a completely different beast than getting them through clinical trials. And it's why the mega, providers, whether it be a Pfizer or Eli Lilly, they almost always are acquiring these things or licensing them as they go through the late stage clinical trials, because you're basically their R&D arm, and then they know how to commercialize and sell and do all those things. So do you want to be in the commercializing and selling business? It sounds like you much prefer to work with a larger partner to commercialize it.
Yeah, that's correct. And we have our corporate venture partner, KVK Tech, is a CMO, contract manufacturing organization, and they have the ability through the PBMs and through regular distribution. They could do the distribution
Hmm.
if we got brought it all the way through commercialization. But the big component is the marketing component, and there is an advantage for big pharma who has shelf space and can just add another SKU and get it onto the market. So, in the end, the greatest valuation inflection point or unlocking the value that we believe we have will be through partnerships.
That makes a lot of sense. In terms of those phase two drugs that you have, when you think about phase three, one, just help us all understand the type of investment that a phase three is. I don't think people realize quite how extensive it can be from a monetary time perspective, all of those things, labor intensity, and two, just, timelines to get those things done.
Yeah, so we're using what's called the 505(b)(2) pathway, which is a pathway that's been created for combining therapeutics that have already been approved. So the therapeutics that we're working with they've been in the market for 20 or 30 years. They've come off a patent. And so by using them, or the safety data component, the phase one component is relatively relaxed. We still have to do a tox study, but it's relatively relaxed. But moving on to out of phase two and into phase three, some of the trials could be as inexpensive as between 8 and 12 million, and could be as expensive as 20 to 25 million. When I think about the drugs that we're working on, if it was a new chemical entity, these drugs are, they spend hundreds of millions of dollars on these therapeutics. And one of the fascinating things that came out of our drug results that we just had, for the fun of it, I asked AI, if we were to make a new chemical entity to create what we just created, how much would it cost and how long would it take? And it said $500 million in 8 years.
Huh.
And so, we're able to bring drugs to market in the, 3 to 4 year time frame.
Got it. Understood. As you continue to build out this pipeline, you mentioned arthritis, but at the core of it, you're talking about inflammatory response in the body, which is obviously a very interesting category, a very large category that affects a lot of different things. So as you continue to push forward, do you just see kind of an endless pathway to continue to create these new drugs that can manage different inflammatory responses throughout the body for, the various reasons that inflammation occurs in the body?
Yes, and that's what, like, when we came up with the idea of Atlas, I mean, that was the purpose. I mean, we have over 1 million data points now. We start thinking of when we have 10 million data points or 100 million data points, and or billion data points, and like it's only going to make the engine that much more efficient. And then so that's the internal engine, and then outside of that, we've also developed another tool for us to go out and to evaluate all of the patent, using USPTO and also clinicaltrials.gov, and identify therapeutics that are that either have IP and they're not doing anything with it, or that they've just come out of a clinical trial and for drug discovery, and they have no plan for going into drug development. So as we're advancing our pipeline of therapeutics, towards commercialization, we're also looking at how we can fill the pipeline with other rich therapeutics within the space around inflammation, in the categories that we're talking about.
When we think about numbers, right, for investors who are considering investing in Sen-Jam, the licensing model, what does that typically look like? What would you get versus the cut that goes to the organization that's actually selling and distributing and manufacturing?
Yeah, so one of the things that we do a market analysis evaluation to set all of that stuff up. So to give you for instance, our drug for inhibiting the adverse effects of alcohol, we have patents granted in 23 countries for that,
Mm.
and before phase two, risk-adjusted net present value, that drug was valued at $108 million in for given the patent portfolio we have and the markets that we're looking at. At the completion of phase two, that valuation went up to 311 million. So right now, that single drug alone is worth 311 million. And what's really interesting when you look at the data, when we look at, okay, where does the value with the step function for the valuation from the end of phase two to the end of phase three, it goes up from like 311 million to about 650 million. What's interesting is as we're de-risking, it's still private equity return. So that's one of the things that I continue to look at, that going from 300 million to 600 million could still be a private equity investment to fund that 8 to 12 million to bring it to end of phase three. But a big part of it is we've de-risked we've done so much de-risking up to this point. We've got that one trial to go, and still a big step function in valuation for the asset, but that's kind of how it goes. And then from a licensing perspective, if someone was looking to in-license, typically you come up with a deal value, and the deal value is based on where it is in its lifeline. There's usually an upfront payment, and then there's milestone payments, and the milestone payments could be on the regulatory side, as well as there could be some milestones for achieving certain sales level, and then ultimately it falls on a percentage of net revenue that's derived from the product, which usually runs between 8 and 12%. So the benefits to the licensee, they're putting up capital upfront for the upfront payment, the milestone payments, but they're really getting the bulk of the revenue on the back end. And that's where some of my advisors have seen these numbers and have seen how we've advanced things. And our business model, asset light, is get the product to the end of phase two, bring in a partner that wants to take it through commercialization. But people see those numbers, and you're only going to take 10% in net revenue when we could have 100%. But those numbers add up a lot. So the asset that I'm talking about for the alcohol's impact on inflammation, that's been on net revenue over the life of the patent is $1 billion. So it's that's only for 10%. So the market is a $10 billion market over the license of the length of the patent. So it's significant.
Well, two things come to mind when listening to you talk about that. First off, just for the alcohol specific drug, is that going to be an over-the-counter product where you're literally just picking it up on the shelf like a Tylenol?
Yes, we went down the FDA OTC group, and that will be an over-the-counter therapeutic. We're combining two over-the-counter therapeutics now for that therapeutic.
And then the second question is, in terms of finding that licensing partner, is there an agency that you work with to try and connect with people who could want this? Is it just direct outreach? Is it them finding you? How does that process typically work?
It's a combination of all of the above. I find that we're an easier target than when we're looking for capital. It seems like it's much easier for everyone that you identified in that category to be looking for us. So we're constantly approached by people who look to do market analysis and place intellectual property or licensing. We have been approached by consumer companies who are interested in licensing our asset for them to own either a division or own some component of it. And then we have gone out and we've pursued companies that do this for a living. They're like in investment banking in this space of doing the market analysis, identifying prospective companies that could be interested in us, building the valuation, and then running it through a process.
As you think, 2 to 3 years out from where you are today, what does success look like for Sen-Jam?
Well, it's really a great question. We're coming off of we're in awe right now with just over the last couple of months and what we've experienced, And I just put out over the weekend some enterprise valuations for our portfolio of asset that we've been able to run through our AI model. And so from a from a success perspective, we're looking to build out our atlas, continue to build it out, continue to train it, and be able to just rinse and repeat. I mean, one of the things that I've learned, my background has been in supply chain. So I built a number of supply chain companies. We built mission critical supply chain solutions. And that's the mentality I'm bringing to the pharmaceutical world. And now with a white sheet of paper, when I think about improvements around operational excellence, improvement around clinical trials, improvement around all these different areas, our ability to increase speed to patient, drive the cost of drugs down, and make therapeutics available to everyone on the planet is, it's what we're manifesting. And so success for me is to just continue to build out the process that's able to be, reliable, repeatable, and able to be scaled by somebody other than the developer.
I'll give you the last word here. For those investors who are on the line, what do you want them to know?
We are closing our Reg CF on WeFunder on March 31st. It's our third campaign with WeFunder. We've raised over $5.5 million in this campaign alone. We've raised over $2 million. We have a huge step up in valuation from where we are currently. It's we're raising money at $150 million valuation currently, and the third party that's come to us is funding the phase 3 clinical trial for one asset alone, and at a 300, they're willing to take equity at a $300 million valuation. That doesn't take anything else in for the whole platform, and then just the analysis that I just did, looking at de-risking our other assets and redoing our valuation profile. We see our valuation significantly higher than where it is today. I'm not driven by the valuation. I'm driven by our ability to perform. We've raised about $10 million to date. And what we've been able to create with that is in my mind, has been incredible. We're hoping that we have enough runway that we're going to be bringing in institutional money, in the 40, 50, $100 million range to bring our therapeutics, the balance of them to the end of phase 2 and to NDA.
If you like what you heard on the show today, you can invest $250 or more in Sen-Jam Pharmaceutical on WeFunder until March 31st, 2026. And of course, if you want to learn more about Sen-Jam, you can check out our analysis at Kingscrowd.com and search Sen-Jam Pharmaceutical. And as always, if you liked what you heard on the show today, please like, subscribe, and share our podcast wherever you listen so more investors like you can find us.